All right, good morning. It's week 13, day 4. We've just got done with our second week of Django, doing the Django REST framework introduction now, which will be the meat and bones of our projects coming up. Um, so today we're going to start Dockerizing um, the backend with our database. I pulled up a repo from a few weeks ago when we did the full stack week, just a brief week where we kind of looked at how we can get everything working together in a full stack environment. This is that People Getter app. And y'all should be kind of familiar with this. We had, three separate things, which is what every stack has: our front end, our database, and our API layers. And within each of them, we had Docker files. And pretty much everything was set up. We had to write a script to go ahead and spin up all these individual Docker containers so that they can work together. And this kind of went through how all those different Docker files spun everything up. But it was it's it's kind of tedious to go ahead and just say, okay, go ahead and run this script to spin up our Docker image that we have are building in our database thing. And then do all this inspecting, get the API or the IP address from our Docker container there, and then go ahead and start all these. It's a lot. It's a lot of trying to coordinate together all these different containers. We did it with a script, but thankfully, Docker has a tool that is built in that makes this a lot easier, and we're going to start getting into today. And that is Docker Compose. So this is the documentation for Docker Compose. You can just Google it. I don't think we have a link in today's lecture anywhere. No, I don't see a link to it. So you could just Google Docker Compose. It should be one of the first things that pops up. But we're going to use Compose because it is a tool for defining and running multi-container applications. Perfect. That's what we're doing. We have three different containers and we want to run them all together simultaneously. This tool makes it easy for us to go ahead and just kick off a Docker Compose and it will do all the building necessary instead of us writing a whole bunch of different scripts to get it to work together. So back to today's lecture. We're going to be working with this wine API. The link should work now. It should bring you to something that looks like this. Doesn't have a README. But this is a Django REST framework project that has been created for us to work through for today's lecture. So if you want to fork that and clone it down and open it up and work together, yes, Art.
I got a 404 on that link, but I saw you just had it open. The one that you had open, can you drop that into Slack, please?
Yeah, 404, probably don't have permissions to look at it. I'll drop this in Slack, but I might have to, wait, this is mine. Never mind. Let me go
I,
back to the,
I can actually help with that too. I managed to find another way to grab it. That was one of the issues.
okay. Did,
Let me,
uh,
it
did you
was,
go to the curriculum
I
or the
actually,
repos?
I went to the repos, yeah, and just typed in wine app and found it. Um, I can send it to you here.
Did you grab the version 1?
I grabbed the version 1, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, this is set to private. I will fix that. So y'all can grab the version 1. Um, yeah, I gotta fix that for the next class anyways, because you're gonna be using this wine API a lot, and this version 1 doesn't have all the branches. So I'm gonna work on getting the other one not private so that y'all can see it. But this one works just fine because this is the bare bones at what we start with the other, oh, get her away from there, but what this one, let's see, just gonna compare. Yeah. This one has setup data though with it. We don't need that at this point. That's fine. So this will work just fine for at least doing today's project. Look at this. Okay. Okay. Thank you for pointing that out.
Yeah.
Okay, so yep, we're going to use that API. And again, you can go, if you didn't see how I did that, if you go up top and just click your CP evening and weekends, and then there's a tab called repositories, and then you could search in the repositories for wine, and it'll be probably the only thing that pops up for you because I see now it is private. Okay, so I clone that down and this is what I ended up with. Y'all will not have the setup data, but that's okay. I don't actually run that in today's lesson. So, okay, pull over the README to the other side here. So we go in order. Okay, so back, actually, I do want to look at this. This is again, oh, no, I don't want the Django framework one. I wanted the people getter. Hang on, I'm getting the people getter. It's a day 3. Okay, maybe this has everything. Okay, so looking at this repo, if we take a look at all the Docker files, this one is actually doing quite a few things for us. It has to copy requirements.txt, pip install those requirements, and then copy over our Python files and all that and run it. So that's a pretty involved Docker file there. When we come to the database though, and in this lecture, we're just going to be focusing on getting our database and API working together because that's all we've been doing right now, right? With the Django REST framework, we're focusing on the backend and our database right now. So looking at these two Docker files specifically, we're not worrying about front end yet. We don't have a front end. We could see that this Docker file for the database is pretty simple, right? This is what we're used to seeing. We're used to seeing just from that Postgres image, we're going to go ahead and copy our initialization into there, and it just kicks up and starts running, right? So today, when we make we're going to start by, let's see, making our Docker compose file. So instead of making individual Docker images, right, or Docker files right now, we're going to be working in this file called Docker compose. And you would just name it that. If you're starting a new project, you'd name it docker-compose.yaml. And this is what's in the line API right now. So we can look, this Docker compose has a version. This might be an issue for some. We'll see. I think some of the new updated Docker Compose doesn't require a version, so we might be able to take that out. But then we have a tab here called Services, and we can see our database is underneath the Services section. And underneath our database, we can see the image that it's pulling from, the environment variables that we're using with it, the ports, and then we have our volumes. So volumes is what allows our data to persist. And we've had it in a couple of others, I think, where when you delete your Docker container that's running or bring it down, and then when you pull it back up, you still have data in the database, right? So that's those volumes. This is going to be kind of a copy paste thing for a while. This is how you're going to set up your database section in your Docker Compose. And the volumes down here is what's holding that Postgres database volume. So we're going to add another service to this because this is Docker Compose. We want everything wrapped up in this file. So we have our database set here already. That's just pulling from a Postgres image. It's an easy thing. But our API, we want to get that now running in a Dockerized instance. And to add that here, we're going to add it underneath services. This is where we put everything, all our different containers that we're going to be running, basically. So under services, we want to add an API service because that's what our backend is. It's an API for us to get data from. But before we could do that, we need to actually create a Docker file for our API. Because if we look here, this is just giving an image and some environment variables and the volumes and some port mapping, but there's no like commands being run. There's not all the extra stuff we had to do with our Django REST framework, our backend. We had to do a lot of copy requirements, install those requirements, and then get it up and running, right? So we're going to have to make a Docker file to explicitly define all of those actions that we need to take for the backend. So at the root level here of our project, we don't want it nested underneath anything. We're going to leave it at the root level. We'll make a Docker file. And the README today has what we'll put in our Docker file, and it should be very familiar. Again, we've done this a couple of times in the full stack section, but it's going to specify our image that we're pulling from, right? Set our work directory as source, copy our requirements.txt into there, install those requirements.txt, then copy everything from here into that source. And then this now is doing a unicorn command. That's going to be our server to go ahead and handle those requests for our backend. And it's going to put it running on port 8000 or listening on port 8000. And it's taking our wines. Let's see. So where this comes from, this is our application. It comes from right here, this wines WSGI file and the name of the application. So this will pretty much stay the same also between all your projects. This is going to be pretty standard. You're going to use this image. We can't use Alpine. We've mentioned this before in a previous lesson, and I said that it's likely because of some dependency we have that we need to use a heftier Python image. And what that is specifically is the Scicop G2. So using that in Alpine is just, I guess it can't handle it as well as we need it to. So we use this Python Buster image instead. Let's see. So we'll use, this will pretty much stay the same. The only thing that would change is this workers line here. This is going to be the name of whatever project, Django REST framework project you have. Okay, because we noticed this wines is the one that has our settings file in it. So that means that this wine API is the application. When we do create app, right? That was this wine API. When we do start project, wines was the project. It has our settings file and this WSGI. So this will change to be whatever your project was named. Okay, so this is the Docker file. This will get our Django REST framework up and running. Now we need to add this to our Docker Compose because I don't want to have a script that does Docker Compose and then kicks this off too. We don't need to do that. We can just add it into our services field here. So now let's add a new service. We're going to add an API service. And under your API, you need build, which is where is the Docker file that you're going to use to create this. So here we did image, and we specified an image we were using to build. But when we put build, we're saying it's a keyword to find a Docker file to use. So at the level of this Docker compose, the Docker file is at the same level, right? So we can just look here in this current directory for that Docker file. So it's going to build the image using this Docker file because we've said build, not image. And then we need to do some port mapping. We run this is going to be pretty standard too. We're going to do this 8,000. So 8,000 from the from where we're working on what is it? Where does this escape me right now? To the source to the host. So we're going to do 8,000 from where we're at to 8,000 in the container. And then we can't just get this up and running. We don't want this to be built first or alone, right? Because our API is working with data that needs to be placed in a database, right? So we don't want the API running on its own. We want to make sure that it only runs if the database is up and running. So we're going to put in a line here that says depends on, and this specifies what other service needs to be running in order for us to build and run this one. So we want our database. Our database has to be up and running before we can do our API build. All right, so the rest of it still looks good. We still have our Postgres database service down here and then the volumes, but this was the only thing we needed to add to this file was our API. And the README says, of course, it's a little different than this one because we're going to be building from a local Docker file instead of using an image on Docker Hub. Okay, so once we've updated this, let's go in and look at our settings file just to make sure that everything we're going to kick off and start running with our Docker Compose is set up to work with our Django REST Framework project. So first things we always want to look at is the database. We need to make sure that our database section reflects what we're going to have running. So we are going to use Postgres, and it is going to be the WINES database. We're going to have the user and password as Postgres. But the host now, we're not running this image locally. So our host is not going to be our local host. We're going to be running this image, or we're going to be running this database, sorry, as a Docker container, right? So before we had to resolve the IP address and make sure that was put in here and matched so that it would find that container's IP address and be able to connect up to it. We're not going to have to do that anymore because Docker Compose will do that for us because we've told it it's going to have an API and a database. It will already know where that database exists. So the host is just going to be, get pictured. It would help if I didn't delete everything. Just going to be database because that is the name of the service in our Docker Compose here is database. So that is the host, and Docker Compose is smart enough to go ahead and find that IP address and resolve it for us. And now port mapping. So this is the port on the host machine that will be mapped to the 5432 in the container. And we did that because they were on different networks, right? But now when we run this container in a Docker Compose situation, both of them are going to be running on the same network. They both have the same IP address, right? So we can change this. We don't have to do port mapping anymore, not 5432. We can change this back to the default Postgres port. no need to do mapping because now we're on the same network, so they can use the same port. Okay, so that was all we needed to update here. Make sure that our database connection was correct because we're about to build the database and kick off our API running on 8,000. Let me just make sure. Yes. Art, do you have a question?
Yeah, I guess I'm a little confused. I think I'm getting stuff just mixed up together. Like this folder you have called wines. Was that the equivalent of like what we had like student.app or student underscore app?
No, so this would be, let's see, I wonder what the student was. This would be when you first set up your Django project and you did that Django dash am start project or whatever. And this is the name you give the overall project. This wine API is when you did like manage.py start app my wine under. So this would be like the student underscore app.
Okay, so within that one we would have like the models and all that junk. Oh, perfect.
Yep, exactly.
Oh, okay.
So this one's where all of our project settings are.
Gotcha. Okay, and so did we have to add that wine underscore API as a what is it? In the settings, yeah, yes, install that. There it is. That was my question. You read my mind.
Yep,
Okay. Thank you
a
very much.
good, that is definitely a good thought and something to check, especially if you're inheriting this repo from somebody else and you want to go back and check their work. So good question and good thing to note. Yes, they've got it set up so that this app is attached to this project. That is a good question. All right, so this is all we need to run a command called docker compose build. And when you run docker compose build, it will kind of like when we do docker run or whatever, or docker build in the name of it'll find it will find this file, this docker compose file, and run this. And we could do that now. However, if we think about what we need to do to get our Django REST framework server up and running, right now, we are just installing the requirements and copying everything over into the source directory. And then this command Gunicore, this is just opening up opening this up as the server and ready to accept connections over 8,000. So when we start up our Django REST framework stuff, our server, if we want to get data and make sure everything's good to go in the database, what do we need to do before we can start working with adding data or pulling up data? Like, let's say you just created this project and this application. If I wanted to start like adding things to the database, can I just go ahead and start going to town right now? I've just made this. I haven't done anything. I just got done writing this model and I'm done now. I'm good.
Yeah. Well, you gotta do the Docker compose up, maybe, and then you have to do the make migrations and migrate.
Yes, migrations. So right now we've got our Docker file set to just copy requirements and copy all these files and then just sit there and listen and wait for requests. However, we know when we're setting up our Django projects that if we want to, first, if we want the database to um, look like how we want it to look with the tables that we expect to be there that we've created, we need to make migrations, right? Migrations, there are no migrations in this right now. and there's going to be no migrations in the containers either. You're just copying source code into there. So sure, we can copy this in there, but that database is not going to have this table until you make migrations. So what we need to do, we can run Docker Compose, and we can build this. It should run the database first because this API depends on the database. So it'll set up the database first. And then I want to make migrations and migrate the API, all the stuff in our Django REST framework, basically. So to do that, we are going to create a script file to kind of string this all together because I could do this all in the command line. I can do a Docker Compose, but then I'd have to wait a little bit to make sure that this got created first and then this got created next and then run my migrations. But I'm going to create a script to do that for me. So we're going to call this, let's see, what do they call this script? Run compose. We're going to call it run compose. And this is going to, and this is in your README. And this is one of our first gotchas. So this here is saying run the command docker compose up -d, we know, which means to run it in the background, and then build. So docker compose up build. Now we're going to sleep for 5. And that's to make sure that the Postgres container is ready. And then after we just wait and make sure those containers are ready, we're going to exec into our API image that we're building, our Docker instance that we're building there. We're going to exec into it, kind of like how we exec into our Postgres images, we can exec into our Python one as well, right? So we can go in there and run the commands in our Python, our Django REST framework image, container, our instance that's running. So we're going to exec in there and we're going to run the command Python manage.py make migrations in that container. Then we're also going to follow that up by execing in there again and running the command migrate. So this will build our containers for us. This will wait, make sure they are built, and then this will get into that API container that we've created and make migrations and migrate. That will push the model that you worked on here over into your database. So in theory, we should be able to just run this command because it's going to look for this Docker Compose file here in the same directory and go ahead and run through the Docker Compose stuff. So let's give it a shot. We called this, oh, not Docker, we called it run. And I already see an issue. I couldn't tab over, but we're going to do this together. So I'm going to just kick off run compose prod. Oh no, I got a permission denied. And you all will probably get this a lot when creating your own script files. So let's take a look at it and see what's going on. I'm going to do, since it's permission denied, I think it's something with the permissions of the file. So if you do an ls-l, you can take a look at the permissions of the file in the current directory you're in. So we could see these ones down here have X. Okay, does anybody know what this is telling me? All these different things here.
Yes.
I know Cisco knows. Does anybody else?
I think those are just your permissions, whether you can only read or you can write to a file.
Okay. Yep, that's a good start. There's also X is execute. This first group is the owner of the file. The second grouping is users, or no, what is it? I wrote this down because I don't really know. I just know it's all the different group. First is owner, second is group, and then this is all others. So we can see when looking at this script I just wrote here, all it has is read and write and then read access. There is nothing in here letting me execute this file. There's no X's. So that's a problem. I need to execute this. I want to execute this. Thankfully, we can force it to update and get the execute permissions on there. So you do a chmod 755. This is just the code to set it to execute. I had to Google it. I don't really know it myself. And then you target the file you want to change the permissions on. Okay, so I wonder if it did anything. Let's take a look. Now we can see this run compose prod. Well, so first off, it was just white, couldn't do anything but read and stuff. But now we can see it's highlighted green, which was like this one. It's an executable we can run. And we see all the executable permissions in here across the board. So now that one is fixed. That was the first issue you would probably run into while making these updates to this repo. So now let's go ahead and go back and try once again to run compose prod or run compose. Oh no. Now it's telling me that this line 1 in my run compose file, command not found for Docker compose. Let's take a look. So I'm in there already. So it's telling me this line here is not right. Right? It says command not found. So let me go to the documentation here. Let's do quick start. That should probably be good. Oh, look, how to build and run with compose. This looks different. Right, that says Docker space compose. This one's doing a Docker dash compose. So I'm going to go ahead and try this that the documentation is telling me because it's telling me command is not found. This is the command I'm running, Docker compose. So let's just try this, a Docker compose up with a space because that's what documentation said. Let me clear this so it's moved up to the top. So now let's try run compose prod and we could see that was it. That was all we needed to change. It is a new command now. That Docker dash compose was an older version, I think. Uh-oh. We've run into another problem. So it looked like it was working, right? Everything's running. The database was pulled. It was building. Now it's going to the API part here. And we can see it's going through each of these steps, like from this image here, then we're going to load the build context, we're going to make our working directory, and then we got to this pip install requirements.txt, and it failed here. We got an error. So who can look in the terminal here and tell me where I should start looking for issues with my requirements.txt? It could not do a pip install on these. Can we see anywhere we may have had an issue?
Yes.
Okay, where does it look like I'm having an issue? Let's open my pip or my requirements.txt too and take a look.
So it is the install portion of it that install equal 1.3.5, and that's where it's having the problem, and that's one of the issues I found. And the new command for that is pip dash install.
Okay.
So
You know what? I'm just going to take it out. We don't need it.
yeah, that'll work too.
So that makes it a little bit easier. I did some trial and error too to see this. I'm like, I don't see anywhere we need the install for now. So you can just take it out. Did you run it separately in your Docker file? a new command or anything, or how did you fix
No,
that?
no. What? Yeah. No, I just took it out. I ended up taking it out as well. I actually did the new command and just ended up taking it out because I didn't see any sense in having it either. Um, but if you wanted to, if you wanted to add an upgraded pip install, you could just add that to the Docker file and do that pip update in there,
Hmm.
So, but yeah.
Yep, 100%. So, yep, this is going to be a frequent thing when you're on the job. You'll get tasked to update, make some enhancement for an application you support or something, and go to run it, and there will be outdated dependencies um, that you'll have to update or remove depending on what you're doing. So, this is one of them. Eh, Thankfully, this was the only one. Otherwise, we would have had to go and try to change a whole bunch of other stuff. But that reading the command line there, or terminal, sorry, reading the terminal told us that it could not find that version. You may have been able to do some other stuff there, but like Cisco said, and I showed you, you can just remove it um, from your requirements.txt file. So now that I've removed it, because that was the only one it was hanging up on so far that I saw, right? It got this one, whatever, Django REST framework. You got both the Django REST frameworks, okay? And this Gunicorn. Uh, so let's see how it does with the rest of it now that we took that problem child out. So we'll run compose again. And we're looking good. We got to psych up G2. All right. And now we can see our application is running on port 5454. Okay. So we saw it hung up there for a little bit, right? We had these two containers that said started. It told us, all right, it's available. And then all of a sudden this popped up on the bottom. And we can see this is the migrations that we told it to do. We told it to spin up our containers, wait for 5 seconds to make sure these were up and running and started, and then make migrations and migrate. So it did that within that container. So if we do Docker, yes, we could see we have both our API and our Postgres database containers up and running. And they should be available. Uh-oh, wait. Did I not update I see something that might be wrong. Where am I looking? Here. Okay. I still have a port mapping because I did not just grab from the README. So remember when we went into our settings file and we removed the mapping from our settings? I could see down here when I was looking at the ports that everything was running on. Our database is running expecting connections over 5454, but we changed that because they're both running on the same network now. We don't need this mapping to go from 5454 to 545 or 5432. Looking in my Docker Compose, it is because I left this port section in there. If you don't have to do a port mapping, you do not need to use that. So I think technically we could also probably remove this, but we'll leave it in for now because they have it in our README. We could play with that later, but okay, so now that I made that update, I'm gonna have to do this all over again, but we don't want a port mapping for a database. They're on the same network. It's going to expect the same connections. Oh, this makes sense though, because we're going to be hitting this 8,000 from our local machine, actually. So that port mapping makes sense. Let's go ahead and stop this then. To stop anything that you have running with Docker Compose, you simply do simply Docker Compose dev, and it will stop your containers that are associated with this Docker Compose. It's going to take a minute to turn off this API. Okay, now I'm going to do my clean to make sure that everything's cleared up and I'm not going to have any issues rerunning this. Okay, I removed that port mapping. That was my bad. We didn't need that. So now, since I've removed that, we could simply do our run compose again, which is going to do a Docker compose, which looks at our Docker compose file, much like when we do a Docker build. And it's going to run through and create these services and then sleep and then make our migrations. Okay. And we'll go back after we rerun this to make sure that the ports look good and there's no mapping for the database because we don't need to. Okay, so now it's just giving me that it's running on 8,000. We'll go there in a second. Let's do PS and look. Okay, perfect. That one's only listening now on 5432, which is what we want because they're on the same network. And then this has got 8,000 from our local host going to 8,000 in the API instance or container. So now everything should be up and running. We should be able to, let's see, go to that local host. I've got it on the other screen. I'll pull it over in a second. Okay. So if you click go to the 8,000, port 8,000 on your local host, you'll get this. It looks like we failed, but we did not because we could see there is no URL in our Django REST framework that is just empty. You know, this is no endpoint basically. We have an admin endpoint and we have wines endpoint. So may look like we didn't succeed, but that we did. We just have to go to an endpoint that we have defined in our Django REST framework. So wines is defined. And if we go there, this looks awful. I don't know why this is looking like this now. The GUI for the Django REST framework stuff. But it works. It shows that when we do a get to this wines endpoint, we go ahead and get these results. And we could go in Postman and see even better. So let's do that. Let's go ahead and get localhost. Look, I was already doing it earlier. Localhost port 8000/wines. We'll send a get request there. And beautiful. We could see the JSON that's returned from a get request. So our server built correctly and is up and running in a Docker container and serving up information or data from the database. How did that have information in there already?
That's a good question. Mine didn't.
So I have this setup data.py, but I didn't see where that's actually getting ran.
You had set up data.py. I didn't see that in mine.
Yeah, this is one of the things you're missing using the version 1.
Oh, there you go.
Interesting. I wonder if it just automatically found this.
Is that in your Docker?
No, it's the only thing that I do is copy everything,
Huh.
but I don't explicitly exec in there and run this. Like this is what this command you would run within that instance.
Right.
Or in that container. I keep saying instance. But I didn't
Did
do
you
that.
build it before? The class? And you just ran it manually or something? I don't know.
No, and I
And
did a clean, so it should have wiped out even the volumes. Maybe it didn't actually.
it's not in the
No,
run compose? Nope, it's not in there either.
weird.
Yeah.
All right, so you guys probably won't have data returned if you're using the other one, but mine had this, and somewhere it might have been from the past one. I don't think I brought down yeah, I don't think I brought down the volumes. So that would make sense because I did Docker compose down. That just brings down your containers, but it won't bring down the volume with it. think you have to do like a Docker compose down -v or whatever. Docker compose down with volumes. We're just Googling this really fast. Yeah, Docker compose down -- volumes will remove the volumes associated with it. So I'm gonna try that. Docker compose down. And then I'm gonna run this again and see if it has that in there. Any questions while I'm doing this little experiment here on the main part, which is creating this Docker compose file, and how we still, you know, we had to have a Docker file for our backend because it's a little complicated, but how we kind of just chain that all together in this file. Any questions there with that? And how we wrote this run compose script to kick it off?
Nope.
Okay. This is going to be, oh, here we go. Okay, I probably did it. Look it, I had a volume because look at all the stuff it did now. Last time I ran this, it did not do all that. Look, it only had this run. So I had a volume still in there. Let's see if there's data now. Let's do another GET request. Nope, no data. Okay, so that was from a past example I did way long time ago, and my volume still existed on my local host here. So anytime you're working with volumes, if you don't want it to mess you up in the future, do Docker compose down -- v or volumes -- volumes. Okay. But yes, again, this is going to be pretty cut and paste for a lot of your projects, both of these. The only place you're going to have to change things is with the name of your application for your Django REST framework. And then making sure your database names are correct as well. And saying, okay, so the other thing you'll have to make sure with this, if you make a run compose script for your future projects, we are execing into this Docker container here. Typically, this is going to be the name of the directory you're working under. So this is drf-y-api. That's the name of this directory. And then API is the service name. And then -1 is like the instance of container. So when you're updating a run compose script, you'll likely change this part of the name. And this part will have to match the directory you're working under, if that makes sense.
Yes, I had to change it for the V1. So I right after API, I had to put -v1 in between it to get it to work.
Yep, you can also look when we did our Docker PS and looked at all of our containers that were up and running, you could see the image name here.
Mm-hmm.
And then -1 is just that first one. So you would take what this image is named and then put on that -1 afterwards. So yes, yours will look different because it's named different, right? It's going to be the drf-y and API v1, like Cisco said. So that is what goes in here because you're execing into this image container. Okay, any other questions on how we set up the Docker compose, the Docker file, and then the run compose? The README is pretty good about walking you through this process. Okay, I'm gonna stop recording and we'll go through our challenge for the day.